Night falls over the Giza Plateau. The tourists are gone. The sun slips beneath the horizon, staining the limestone gold for a fleeting moment before shadows stretch across the desert. The wind stirs, silent and slow, whispering through ancient stone. The Sphinx, half buried and eternal, watches with hollow eyes, fixed on the eastern horizon. Its body worn smooth by forces no longer active in this part of the world. Behind it, the three pyramids rise like frozen waves on a sea of sand. They do not shimmer, they do not speak, but they wait. And in the stillness that follows the end of day, they seem to awaken not as tourist attractions, not as relics of a known past, but as questions carved in stone. We have been told a story etched into our education, repeated in books, recited in museums, and echoed in the confident voices of tour guides, that in the middle of the 3rd millennium before the Common Era, Pharaoh Khufu of Egypt's 4th dynasty ordered the construction of the Great Pyramid, a tomb, a triumph of royal will and labour, that tens of thousands of workers quarried, hauled, and lifted over 2 million blocks of limestone into place with nothing but copper tools and rudimentary ramps, that his son, Khafre, carved the Sphinx in his own likeness, raising the 2nd pyramid behind it, and that Menkaura completed the triad with a smaller but no less impressive pyramid nearby. These monuments, we are told, mark the pinnacle of early human engineering, the power of centralized government, the glory of Egypt's golden age. It is a compelling narrative, neat, logical, repeatable, but something stirs in the sand, and that certainty begins to shift. Before we go further, pause with me for a moment. If what you've heard so far resonates, if the title of this video caught your attention because something in you already questioned the official story, then you're exactly where you need to be. If you're curious about what lies beneath the sands of accepted history, subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the evidence we're about to uncover. Drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world right now. Let us know, are you watching under sunlight, city lights, or stars? And if you're already feeling that this mystery is bigger than what we've been told, share this video with someone who needs to see it. Let them feel what you're feeling. Let them wonder, too. Now, let's return to the question. The Sphinx bears the unmistakable scars of water, deep vertical grooves etched into the walls of its enclosure. Erosion patterns more akin to canyons shaped by rainfall than to anything the desert wind could produce. The last time this plateau saw significant rainfall was nearly 9,000 years ago, during a climatic period when the Sahara was green and alive. Meanwhile, the Great Pyramid contains no mummies, no inscriptions, no evidence of ritual burial. It encodes complex mathematical ratios, pi, phi, and even the polar radius of the Earth. Its precision defies explanation. The corridors inside resonate with sound, their dimensions mathematically exact. It is aligned with true north to within 3/60ths of a degree more accurate than most modern structures. These are not the fingerprints of a culture experimenting with engineering. These are signatures of mastery. Egyptian records from later dynasties make an unexpected confession. They describe Khufu not as the builder of the pyramid, but as its restorer. They describe the Sphinx not as a royal commission, but as something already buried in sand by the time their kings discovered it. These are not the declarations of a creator. They are the actions of a caretaker. What does this mean? It means the story we tell ourselves may not be wrong, but it may be missing its first half. What if the Egyptians, as glorious and advanced as they were, did not build the pyramids, but merely claimed them, refurbished them, and integrated them into their mythology? What if these structures date not to 2600 before the Common Era, but to 7,000 years before that? What if these monuments survived something, some catastrophe, some collapse, and emerged as remnants of a forgotten age, waiting in the sand to be rediscovered? This question does not rise from fantasy or fringe belief. It emerges from evidence that refuses to conform to the timeline we've constructed. It lives in geological surveys, in star alignments, in unexplained construction techniques, and in the strange, persistent silence inside the pyramid itself. It lives in the cultural memory of civilizations that remember a flood, a fall, a time when the gods themselves walked the earth and then vanished. And perhaps it lives in us, a whisper in the collective unconscious, an itch beneath the skin that something important has been hidden or forgotten. So why has this possibility remained so carefully buried? Why is the narrative of tombs and pharaohs repeated so insistently, even when the evidence screams otherwise? Part of the answer lies in the convenience of the current story. It makes sense. It has continuity. It offers certainty. But human history has never been linear. It is cyclical. Civilizations rise to achieve greatness and vanish. Knowledge is discovered, encoded, forgotten, and then rediscovered centuries or millennia later. The Sphinx, the pyramids, and the structures beneath the sand may not mark the beginning of monumental architecture, but rather its survival. Stand before the Sphinx in silence, and you will feel it. Not emptiness, not absence, but presence, something preserved, something deliberate. The stones do not lie, they wait, and in that waiting, they testify to a past far older than our textbooks acknowledge. So we begin again, not with assumptions, but with questions, not with declarations, but with curiosity, not to disprove Egypt's greatness indeed. It is one of humanity's crowning civilizations, but to understand that what they inherited may have shaped them as much as what they built. The monuments are more than tombs. They are time capsules, clues. They are the voice of a lost chapter in human history. The wind sweeps the sand along the base of the Great Pyramid. A cold stillness settles, and in that stillness, the stones seem to exhale ancient, enduring, unmoved by time. They do not care what story we tell about them, but they do hold a truth, and if we learn to listen not just with ears, but with logic, intuition, and science, we may finally hear what they have always been trying to say. At first glance, the Sphinx seems eternal, carved and crouched in silent defiance of time. Its gaze is fixed, its expression enigmatic, its bulk rising from the earth as if it grew from the bedrock itself. But descend into the enclosure that surrounds it, step past the guardrails, past the stories, and into the space carved around its flanks, and a different story reveals itself. You are no longer looking at a monument, you are standing inside a question. Here, the air changes. The sun does not reach all the way down into the pit. The walls rise tall and sheer, as if the earth has opened its mouth around the Sphinx. Run your fingers along those walls. What you feel is not wind-blown abrasion or the sharp angles of chisel marks. You feel smooth undulations, vertical grooves, and rounded channels ridges not of man's making, but of nature's. This is not the mark of tools or time. This is water. In the early 1992, geologist Dr. Robert Schoch visited this enclosure and made a startling observation. Unlike Egyptologists who read history and artifacts, he read it in stone. The walls surrounding the Sphinx, he said, bore the unmistakable signs of heavy, sustained water erosion, weathering patterns that take centuries, even millennia, of rainfall to produce. And there lies the paradox. The Giza Plateau has been dry, arid, and wind-scoured for over 5,000 years. The last time it experienced the level of rainfall required to carve those grooves was nearly 9,000 years ago. During that period, known to climatologists as the African humid period, the Sahara was not a desert. It was a lush savanna. Lakes dotted its landscape. Rivers wound through valleys that are now covered by endless sand. Animal bones found in the region speak of a lost paradise: hippos, giraffes, antelope species that cannot survive in the Egypt we know today. This green Sahara existed between approximately 10,000 and 5,000 years before the Common Era, before the desert claimed the land in its slow, relentless crawl. This is when the Sphinx must have stood, already exposed, already carved, already enduring, not during the reign of Khafre in the 26th century B.C., but during an age when no pyramids stood, when Egypt did not yet exist, when no hieroglyphs had been scratched into temple walls and the Nile flowed in unfamiliar courses. The climate alone tells this story. The rains that shaped those walls did not fall during the dynastic era. They fell thousands of years before it began. Skeptics raised immediate objections. There was no known civilization at that time capable of carving such a monument. But the stone does not care what we know or think. It simply records what happened. Weathering patterns in geology are like tree rings in wood, precise, sequential, irrefutable. The surrounding temples and monuments attributed to the 4th dynasty show entirely different erosion patterns. Horizontal smoothing, the work of wind and sand. Their surfaces are pitted, their edges eroded in line with what would be expected after 4,000 years of desert exposure. But the Sphinx enclosure does not match them. It is older. It is different. To dismiss the erosion as merely misinterpreted wind damage is to ignore the laws of physics. Wind carves laterally. It scours, chips, and sands away. Water carves vertically. It flows, pools, and wears into soft stone with gravity as its guide. The deep vertical furrows on the Sphinx enclosure are consistent with water falling over extended periods, pooling at the base, and draining away slowly, just as rainwater would behave in an open-air enclosure carved into bedrock. Even more telling is the uniformity. The same erosion appears on the Sphinx's body and on the enclosure walls, which means they were exposed to the same environment for the same length of time. They weathered together. If the Sphinx had been carved in 2580, before the Common Era, as mainstream Egyptology insists, its enclosure walls would show the same erosion as nearby Old Kingdom structures. But they don't. They show something far older, far wetter, and far more inconvenient. Critics argue that later restorations could have confused the record, but even repairs are revealing. Stones added in later dynasties can be distinguished by their tight joints and smoother finish. These patches sit atop the original, rain-scarred rock like bandages on an ancient wound. The core limestone underneath remains consistent with pre-desert weathering. The damage had already been done by the time the Egyptians arrived to restore and repurpose the monument. Imagine the Sahara not as a wasteland, but as a vibrant savanna, humming with life. And amid that greenery, on a limestone outcrop overlooking a river valley, someone carved a lion's body, maybe a lion, maybe something more out of the living bedrock. It was not a project of vanity. It was not a tomb. It was a marker, a message, perhaps a symbol of a culture whose name we have lost and whose buildings now lie buried beneath dunes. The rains came, fell for centuries, and carved their story into the monument. Then the climate shifted. The land dried. The grass vanished. The rivers died. And the sand began to rise, covering the monument inch by inch until even memory failed. When the Egyptians rose millennia later, they did not build the Sphinx. They unearthed it. They found it buried to its neck. Mysterious and grand, they may have recarved its face, given it a new identity, perhaps as Khafre or Horus, but they knew it was already ancient, already powerful, and they honoured it the only way they could, by restoring it and placing it within their pantheon. What does this mean for the rest of our history? If the Sphinx is not from the 4th dynasty, then it belongs to no known chapter in human civilization. It becomes a remnant, not of Egypt, but of a lost era, one for which we have no name, no records, no stories that survived except in myths. It implies that human culture, or something like it, achieved great feats before the birth of Egypt, before writing, before cities, before we believed it was even possible. And perhaps this is why the evidence was resisted so fiercely, because if the Sphinx is older than Egypt, then everything must be re-examined. Then history is not a straight line. Then progress is not inevitable. Then we are not the first to stand here in wonder, and perhaps not the last. The stone does not speak, but the Egyptians did, and when they did, they left behind something extraordinary testimony in their own words that shifts the sands beneath everything we think we know. Across centuries, pharaohs carved stories in hieroglyphs, immortalizing victories, divine lineages, and sacred architecture. They boasted of temples built, wars won, and gods appeased. But when it comes to the Sphinx and the Great Pyramid, that voice changes. It becomes quiet, reverent, and strangely unsure. The most striking example is the inventory stela, discovered in the 19th century near the Great Pyramid, dating from Egypt's 26th dynasty, over 2,000 years after the era traditionally credited with building the pyramid. This stela, carved in limestone, describes Pharaoh Khufu not as the builder of the Great Pyramid or the Sphinx, but as one who found these monuments buried in sand and restored them. It states clearly that the Sphinx already existed in Khufu's time, and that he cleared away the encroaching desert to honour it and build a temple beside it. These are not the declarations of a creator. They are the actions of a caretaker. Egyptologists have long dismissed the inventory stela as a later fabrication propaganda, perhaps created to link a then declining dynasty with the glories of Egypt's mythic past. But this dismissal raises an uncomfortable contradiction. Why would a civilization so obsessed with divine authority and kingly pride demote its most revered pharaoh to the role of mere restorer? Propaganda usually inflates a king's achievements, not diminishes them. If the goal was to glorify Khufu, why not attribute to him the actual building of the pyramids? Why frame him as one who unearthed the past rather than shaped it? Another piece of this puzzle stands silently between the paws of the Sphinx, the dream stela. Erected by Pharaoh Thutmose IV around 1400 years before the Common Era, the stele tells a story of a young prince who fell asleep in the shadow of the buried Sphinx. In his dream, the Sphinx spoke to him, promising kingship if he would clear away the sands and restore the monument. Thutmose did just that, excavating the ancient statue and honouring it. But once again, the story lacks any reference to construction. The Sphinx is not described as a recent creation. It is portrayed as a relic, forgotten and submerged, its origin lost to time. This pattern repeats across multiple dynasties. Pharaohs boast about building temples and obelisks. They leave detailed inscriptions about stone cutting and labour, the names of architects, the dates of construction. Yet when it comes to the Sphinx and the great pyramid structures that dwarf everything else, they fall silent. No carving describes the planning of the pyramid. No text outlines the logistics, the workers, or the ceremonies marking its completion. This silence is thunderous. In a culture that carved its deeds into every stone surface, the greatest monument of all is left unclaimed. Even in later eras, when Egyptian priests sought to chronicle their divine histories, the oldest monuments were treated with reverence, not ownership. The temples of Luxor and Karnak, built centuries after the pyramids, are drenched in inscriptions. But Giza remains a mystery. The Egyptians treated the site as sacred, not as a project completed by their ancestors, but as a legacy left by gods or forgotten kings. This reverence, this sense of awe, is embedded in the very language used in their texts, phrases like time immemorial and from the days of the gods, which hint at origins that were already ancient in the minds of those who ruled. To understand the weight of this silence, we must look at Egyptian culture itself. This was a civilization obsessed with legacy. Tombs were filled with detailed instructions for the afterlife. Every pharaoh's deeds were recorded and mythologized. Monuments were propaganda in stone. In such a society, the idea that the most colossal constructions, the Great Pyramid, the Sphinx, would go unmentioned in contemporary records is not just suspicious, it is unthinkable. Unless, of course, those monuments were not built by the pharaohs at all. This reinterpretation is not the invention of modern conspiracy. It is a rereading of the Egyptians' own words, taken at face value. When a text says, Khufu found and restored the Sphinx, perhaps we should believe it. When Thutmose IV speaks of clearing sand from a forgotten statue, perhaps that's exactly what he did. The reluctance of mainstream scholars to accept these statements arises not from a lack of evidence, but from the threat it poses to the existing narrative. The traditional timeline of Egyptian history is neat, sequential, and fits comfortably within the accepted arc of human development. But what if that timeline is built on inheritance rather than invention? What if early dynasties rose not in a vacuum, but in the shadow of structures whose creators had long since vanished? What if the fourth dynasty did not build the pyramids, but encountered them as remnants of a forgotten civilization, a culture destroyed by time? Or flood, or silence? There are precedents for this. Throughout history, civilizations have repurposed the ruins of their predecessors. The Incas built atop the stones of the unknown engineers of Sacsayhuaman. The Romans incorporated Etruscan and Greek foundations into their temples. The Mayans inherited and rebuilt cities older than their own myths. In every case, later cultures adopted the monuments of those who came before, attributing them to their own gods and kings while never truly understanding their origins. Perhaps the Egyptians did the same. Perhaps Khufu, seeing the vast and eroded pyramid, understood its power and claimed it restoring, reshaping, but never building. Perhaps the Sphinx, buried beneath centuries of sand, spoke not of a royal project, but of something far older, carved in a time when the Nile flowed differently and the Sahara bloomed with life. And perhaps that is why these monuments have endured, not because they were meant to glorify kings, but because they carried something greater, a memory, a warning, a legacy too important to be lost, a message etched into the bones of the earth, left for those who would come after. Enter the Great Pyramid not with reverence, but with curiosity. The entrance lies on the north face. Halfway up the face of the structure, a narrow shaft through massive stone. There is no grand staircase, no ceremonial threshold, no gateway inscribed with prayers or curses. The way forward is tight and steep, descending first into a narrow passage before turning sharply upward into the heart of the monument. Here, the stone does not welcome. It encloses. The light of the desert is quickly lost, replaced by flickering beams from torches or artificial lamps. The deeper you go, the more the air seems to thicken, the more the silence grows. This is not the ambiance of a tomb. It is the sensation of stepping into a mechanism, a device of purpose beyond burial. Continue forward, and the passage widens into the grand gallery, an architectural marvel that defies simple explanation, 47 feet high. The walls corbel inward in stepped tiers, creating a vaulted ceiling that draws the eye upward, towards something intangible. Every stone slab is precisely placed, measured to fractions of an inch. There are no decorations, no reliefs, no inscriptions, just precision, geometry, silence. The floor is smooth, the side niches oddly shaped, as though designed to hold something no longer present. The purpose of this chamber has eluded scholars for centuries, but its structure hints at something functional, something deliberate, not a hallway, not a corridor for mourners, something else. At the end of the gallery lies the so-called King's Chamber. It is a room of red granite, the blocks so massive they had to be placed during construction. Each weighs dozens of tons. The joints between them are so tight that a blade cannot pass through. The chamber is empty, save for a single rectangular granite box, often called a sarcophagus. But it has no inscriptions, no lid. Its interior is rough, unfinished, and shows no signs of ever having held a body. Its dimensions, however, are mathematically precise. Its volume matches measurements encoded in the pyramid's layout. Its placement is perfect, positioned at the center of the pyramid's geometry and weight. This is not the design of a burial chamber. Egyptian tombs are covered in hieroglyphs, adorned with murals, and filled with items meant to serve the deceased in the afterlife: gold, food, shabti statues, sacred texts. The walls echo with spells from the Book of the Dead. The tombs of the Valley of the Kings are vibrantly painted, inscribed floor to ceiling with incantations. The King's Chamber contains none of this, only silence and symmetry. So why call it a tomb? Because we needed an explanation, because it had to be something. But when you remove the assumption of burial, what emerges is not emptiness, but design. Consider this. The granite box is larger than the corridors leading to it. It could not have been moved in after the chamber was built. It was placed there during construction. That alone rules out traditional burial practice. You do not build a chamber around a coffin. You carry the coffin in, unless, of course, The box was never meant to hold a body at all. In recent years, acoustical researchers discovered that the king's chamber resonates at a specific frequency, 110 Hz. A tone struck at this pitch will reverberate within the chamber, amplified by the granite walls, creating a standing wave that vibrates through the structure and through anyone standing inside. This is not accidental. The proportions of the chamber amplify this frequency. The material red granite is rich in quartz, a mineral known for its piezoelectric properties. Under pressure, it generates electrical charge. Combined with the acoustic resonance, this suggests the chamber was built not just to contain, but to generate or transmit something: sound, energy, or both. The Grand Gallery, too, appears designed to serve a purpose beyond passage. Some researchers propose that its niches once held wooden or metal resonators, amplifying and channeling sound waves upward. The stepped ceiling could have acted as a waveguide. If this is true, then the gallery and chamber together form an acoustic circuit, a resonant structure engineered to interact with sound in ways that affect not only the building, but the people within it. Below the king's chamber lies another mystery, the so-called Queen's Chamber. It is smaller, also precisely constructed, and features narrow shafts that do not connect to the exterior. These shafts, once thought to be air ducts, were later discovered to align with specific stars Sirius and Thuban when measured against the night sky of nearly 13,000 years ago. These alignments are too precise to be accidental. They required knowledge of stellar positions and Earth's axial precession, a wobble that takes nearly 26,000 years to complete a cycle. Whoever built these passages knew not only the stars of their own time, but how those stars would shift across millennia. This knowledge is not trivial. It implies a civilization with long-term astronomical records, precise engineering tools, and mathematical systems advanced enough to encode cosmology into architecture. The pyramid is aligned to true north with an error margin of less than 3/60ths of a degree. Its proportions encode pi and the golden ratio, its base perimeter multiplied by 43. 200 gives the equatorial circumference of the Earth. The same multiplier applied to its height yields the Earth's polar radius. These are not coincidences. These are data points carved in stone. If this was a tomb, why encode all this? Why align chambers with stars? Why engineer acoustic resonance? Why build with tolerances far beyond what copper tools and manual labor can explain? There is no evidence that the pyramid ever held a body. No mummy, no funerary goods, no records of burial. Only a granite box and chambers tuned to the sky and sound. We are left with a structure that behaves less like a grave and more like an instrument. A device, a library of knowledge frozen in stone. Perhaps it was a place of initiation, of ritual, of transformation. Perhaps it was a machine that harnessed natural forces we no longer understand. Or perhaps it was a monument of memory built not to glorify a king, but to preserve the knowledge of a vanished world. Stand in the chamber and feel the silence. It is not the silence of death, it is the silence of purpose unfulfilled, unrecognized, misunderstood, a silence that waits, that watches, that echoes not with the prayers of the dead, but with a message not yet deciphered. To see the Great Pyramid as merely a tomb is to stand before a thunderstorm and hear only silence. This structure is not just stone upon stone, it is mathematics embodied, a resonance chamber tuned to the planet itself. As the physical evidence deepens, so too does the sense that this was not a monument to the dead, but a device built for a purpose we no longer understand. The clues are not hidden. They are everywhere, encoded in geometry, alignment, sound, and material. They whisper of a function lost in time. Begin with the numbers. The Great Pyramid is a machine of mathematical precision. Its base, if squared and divided by its height, yields the constant pi with startling accuracy. Its slope angle, 51 degrees and 51 minutes, embeds the golden ratio. Phi, a proportion found in everything from DNA spirals to galaxy arms. But these are not symbolic gestures. These are constants. Mathematical truths that span cultures and epochs. They belong not to Egypt, but to the universe. The precision doesn't stop there. The pyramid's base perimeter, multiplied by 43,200, equals Earth's equatorial circumference. Multiply its height by the same number and you get the planet's polar radius. These figures are not approximations. They are accurate to within a fraction of a percent, astonishing considering the tools available to 4th dynasty Egyptians, or perhaps the tools we assume they had, because to encode this information, the builders would have needed to know the exact size and shape of the Earth, including its flattening at the poles, something mainstream science did not fully confirm until the 20th century. Some argue that these mathematical constants are coincidences, but a coincidence repeated in every dimension becomes a pattern, and patterns suggest intent. If the builders wanted to preserve knowledge of Earth's dimensions, what better way than carving it into a structure designed to last for eternity? Knowledge hidden not in books, but in ratios and measurements that could be decoded by any civilization that reached a comparable level of scientific understanding. Now consider the alignment. The pyramid is oriented to true north with staggering accuracy, deviating by less than 3/60ths of a single degree. It surpasses even modern structures in precision. Achieving this would require understanding the Earth's axial tilt and movement over time. The builders would have had to observe the stars for centuries, or have access to records spanning that long. The shafts inside the pyramid, once dismissed as ventilation tunnels, align with key stars from the ancient sky Sirius, Orion's belt, and Thuban, the North Star of 12,000 years ago. This is not mythology. This is astronomy, and it is embedded in architecture. Then there is the sound. Researchers have found that the king's chamber resonates at a frequency of 110 Hz. This is not a random number. Neuroscientific studies show that this frequency can shift brain waves into theta states associated with meditation, intuition, and altered consciousness. In certain religious traditions, chants and sacred tones are tuned to this frequency for exactly this reason. When a sound source such as a drum or human voice is introduced into the king's chamber, the walls vibrate, the floor hums, the entire space becomes an amplifier not of noise, but of experience. The use of red granite here is not accidental. This material, sourced from Aswan hundreds of miles away, is rich in quartz, a mineral with piezoelectric properties. When placed under pressure, quartz produces an electrical charge. Consider the implications. Hundreds of tons of granite, cut and placed with microscopic precision, subjected to the massive weight of the pyramid above. Under such stress, the granite becomes an active component in the pyramid's internal energy dynamics. It doesn't just sit there, it responds. It vibrates, it resonates. Could the pyramid have been designed as a resonant chamber, converting vibrational energy into electromagnetic fields? Could it have focused sound in ways that affected the human body, the mind, or even the surrounding environment? These are not idle questions. The structure was built with a complexity far exceeding the needs of a simple tomb. No other Egyptian burial site contains such alignments, such acoustic properties, or such precise integration of astronomical data. The Great Pyramid is unique. It behaves less like a mausoleum and more like a coded device. Some researchers have theorized that the pyramid was a kind of energy accumulator, a structure that harnessed natural forces, sound, vibration, resonance, and perhaps even magnetism. They suggest that the pyramid may have functioned as a geophysical instrument, measuring Earth's frequencies, or as a healing chamber where vibration altered consciousness. Others see it as a beacon, an amplifier, or a memory device, a structure that could retain and transmit knowledge across time. There is no definitive answer, and yet the evidence grows stronger with each anomaly. The Queen's Chamber contains shafts that align with Sirius and Orion, not mythologically, but mechanically. The Grand Gallery appears, constructed to channel and enhance acoustics. The King's Chamber reacts to sound. The entire structure is geometrically anchored to Earth itself, tied to the cardinal directions, aligned with the precessional cycle of the heavens. These are the hallmarks not of symbolic architecture, but of functional design. Why would a culture encode such information in stone? Because stone endures. Because knowledge, when inscribed in symbols, is vulnerable to fire, war, and forgetfulness. But knowledge encoded in proportions, in stellar alignments, in universal constants, this kind of message survives. It doesn't matter who reads it. The language is mathematics. The grammar is geometry. The audience is the future. Perhaps the Great Pyramid was never meant to be understood by those who lived immediately after its construction. Perhaps it was built for us, or for a civilization that would rise long after a fall. Its builders may have known their world was ending, their time closing, and so they left behind not a chronicle, but a cipher, not a story, but a signal. We are taught that history moves in a straight line. That knowledge accumulates, that we know more than those who came before us. But what if we are only rediscovering? What if the pyramid is a reminder that intelligence is not linear, and that great wisdom can vanish, only to echo centuries later in the stones we assumed were silent? Stand before the Great Pyramid and listen not for the voice of a dead king, but for the resonance of knowledge calling out across time. What you hear is not a tomb, it is a beacon, built not to mourn the past, but to illuminate the future. In the early 1990 seconds, a German engineer named Rudolf Gantenbrink sent a robot into the Great Pyramid, down one of the narrow shafts extending from the Queen's Chamber. The robot, named Upuaut, meaning opener of the ways, crawled through the tiny tunnel, just 8 inches square, ascending steadily for over 200 feet. What it discovered deep inside the stone structure ignited more questions than anyone was prepared to answer. The shaft, long thought to be symbolic or decorative, terminated at a smooth limestone slab sealed, polished, and pierced with 2 small copper handles embedded in its face. It was a door, and it was not supposed to be there. For decades, Egyptologists had dismissed these shafts as mere air passages, spiritual conduits to guide the soul of the pharaoh to the stars. But that idea didn't hold up under scrutiny. The shafts were blocked. They didn't connect to the outside of the pyramid. They were sealed deliberately, inaccessible even to a child, let alone the spirit of a dead king. And yet someone thousands of years ago, went to great lengths to design and seal these passages with architectural precision. The question was no longer what the pyramid did. The question was what was hidden inside it. Nearly a decade after Gantenbrink's discovery, a team led by Egyptologist Zahi Hawass and supported by National Geographic drilled through the limestone slab with a fibre optic camera. Millions watched live as the camera pushed into the dark beyond. What it revealed stunned the audience. Another door, another slab, another seal, no chamber, no treasure. Just a second barrier deeper inside the pyramid's body. The event, heralded as a major breakthrough, ended with silence. No further explorations were allowed. The shaft remained sealed. The deeper door was never opened, and the mystery, for reasons never fully explained, was left untouched. This wasn't an isolated case. Another shaft, this time on the opposite side of the Queen's chamber, was explored soon after. It too led to a mysterious endpoint. In that case, a metal object was discovered, embedded in the stone, a component of unknown purpose, partially hidden from view, unexplained and unexamined. No excavation followed. No permission was granted to proceed. Despite technological capability, despite public curiosity, access was denied. The pyramid remained closed. Why? Why construct narrow, inaccessible shafts that end in sealed doors buried deep within the structure? Why embed copper fittings in the stone? Why go to such lengths to hide these components in places no human could ever reach unless, perhaps, they were never meant to be reached by humans at all? These are not accidental features. They are intentional, deliberate, and they do not align with the known religious or architectural practices of the Old Kingdom. If the pyramid was just a tomb, these shafts make no sense. But if it was something else, something functional, something encoded, then perhaps these doors were locks, or safeguards, or something else entirely. Further radar scans conducted in the late 20th and early 21st centuries revealed additional anomalies inside the pyramid. Voids, cavities, unmapped spaces. One massive void, discovered in 2017 using muon tomography, lies directly above the Grand Gallery. It stretches over 100 feet long and remains completely unexplored. There are no corridors leading to it, no known entrance, no explanation. It is simply there waiting, and the deeper you look, the more the pattern repeats. Tunnels beneath the Giza Plateau have long been rumoured. In 1999, a shaft known as the Osiris Shaft was officially announced 90 feet deep, descending through solid bedrock, with 3 chambers stacked one beneath another, the lowest partially submerged in water. At the bottom sits a massive granite sarcophagus, empty and silent. No body, no inscriptions, no explanation. Like the pyramid, the shaft is precision cut, laboriously excavated through stone, requiring advanced planning and understanding of groundwater management. Its purpose remains elusive. The deeper mysteries it holds are not being pursued. Why the hesitation? In a world where archaeological exploration is celebrated, why are the most promising mysteries of the pyramid system sealed away? Access restricted, curiosity discouraged? If the shafts lead nowhere, if the doors hide nothing, then why not open them and prove it? If the voids are empty, why not explore them and lay the questions to rest? Instead, these features remain untouched, off-limits, protected not by engineering limitations, but by policy This pattern repeats around the Sphinx as well. Ground-penetrating radar scans in the 1,990 seconds revealed subsurface anomalies beneath its pores, rectangular chambers, echo patterns suggestive of voids. But no excavations followed. Permission was denied. Even as private researchers and international teams requested access, the official stance remained firm. There is nothing there worth pursuing. Yet the scans say otherwise. The technology speaks plainly. Something lies beneath the stone, something shaped, something hidden. Consider the broader implications. In an age of fiber optics, robotics, and non-invasive imaging, we have tools that can peer beneath the surface of these ancient monuments without harming them. And yet, every time those tools reveal something unexpected, a sealed door, a mysterious void, an unexplained cavity, the result is the same: silence, restriction, disinterest. It is not just what we haven't found, it is what we have found, and then walked away from. Could it be that the pyramid's interior chambers, shafts, and sealed doors were not designed to contain bodies, but to preserve something else entirely? Knowledge, perhaps, or technology, or objects whose significance we no longer grasp. If the original builders foresaw catastrophe, flood, war, collapse, might they have designed their monuments to hide and protect their most valuable possessions? Not treasure, but wisdom; not gold, but information. What if the shafts were locks, combinations to puzzles? What if the doors were not built to keep intruders out, but to keep something in until the time was right? What if the pyramid was not a tomb, but a vault? And what if we are standing on the brink of rediscovering what lies inside only to turn away? Afraid of what it might mean for the story we've told ourselves for so long? The shafts remain sealed. The second door has never been opened. The great void above the gallery has never been entered. The Osiris shaft lies in darkness. The chambers beneath the Sphinx remain untouched. And all the while, the monuments continue to whisper in silence. Beneath the sand, beneath the stones, beneath the stories we are allowed to tell, lies another Giza, a hidden world etched into the bedrock, a network of shafts, tunnels, and chambers that few have seen and fewer are permitted to explore. This subterranean realm, carved with eerie precision, stands in defiance of the simplistic narrative of tombs and ceremonial structures. It is a part of Giza that the tourists never see, that textbooks never mention, and that officials rarely acknowledge, but it exists, and its silence may be the loudest clue of all. In 1999, Egyptian archaeologist Zahi Hawass publicly revealed a site near the causeway between the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx, known now as the Osiris Shaft. It descends nearly 100 feet into the bedrock in 3 vertical stages, each level containing rooms carved with startling care. The shaft is dark, narrow, and filled with stagnant water in its deepest chamber. Down there, in that submerged, tomb-like room, lies a single granite sarcophagus, massive, uninscribed, and empty. Around it, smaller niches have been carved into the walls. There are no carvings, no prayers, no royal names, no signs of funerary rites, just stone, water, and mystery. When it was announced, the shaft was described as a symbolic burial for the god Osiris. That explanation, however, struggles under its own weight. Why would such a complex labor-intensive excavation be created solely for symbolic purposes? The engineering required to carve these shafts through solid limestone without disturbing the water table or causing collapse is advanced even by today's standards. There are no ramps, no stairs, only vertical descent. Everything had to be lowered in by rope, lifted out by hand, and carved with precision that implies detailed planning. And for what? An empty chamber and a box with no purpose? Ground-penetrating radar has revealed similar voids and tunnels beneath the Giza Plateau. As early as the 1992, scans conducted around the Sphinx revealed anomalies directly beneath its pores, a rectangular chamber, perfectly aligned. Another scan showed a corridor leading away from the monument underground. Were these tombs, storage rooms, or something more significant? We do not know, because these areas, despite being identified by modern imaging, remain unexcavated, sealed off from the public and the scientific community alike. One cannot help but notice the contrast. Sites across Egypt have been excavated with fervour for decades. Tombs in the Valley of the Kings, buried temples in Abydos, entire settlements near Luxor, all open to exploration, research, and international collaboration. But not here, not beneath the Sphinx, not beneath the pyramid, here where the greatest secrets may lie. The doors remain closed. It is not just the Osiris shaft or the Sphinx's pores. In 2017, using muon tomography, a team of scientists announced the discovery of a large void above the Grand Gallery of the Great Pyramid over 100 feet long, potentially larger than the King's Chamber. Its purpose remains unknown. No one has entered. No one knows what it holds. And since the announcement, no further progress has been made. Access denied. Equipment withdrawn. The silence returns. Consider this. The Osiris shaft's granite box could not have been lowered into its chamber after construction. Like the so-called sarcophagus in the King's Chamber, it had to be placed before the ceiling was sealed. It suggests not just intentionality, but foresight. Like the sealed shafts within the pyramid, like the second door discovered behind the first, like the voids detected and ignored. It raises the same question. Why build so much and hide it so well? Could these hidden chambers be repositories of knowledge? Could they contain the remains of a civilization lost to history, a culture that predated dynastic Egypt and sought to preserve what it could before it vanished? If the pyramid encoded mathematical and astronomical data in stone, might the underground network beneath Giza serve as an archive of stone scrolls, sealed boxes, not of bodies, but of information? Ancient texts hint at secrets beneath the plateau. The writings of Arab historians from the early Islamic period speak of subterranean halls and libraries built before the Great Flood, designed to preserve humanity's knowledge from destruction. Some describe hidden chambers protected by traps, others by silence. These tales were long dismissed as legend, but they align uncomfortably well with what modern technology has begun to reveal. Why does it matter? Because history is not just about what we know, it's about what we choose to forget. The hidden world beneath Giza challenges the timeline, the assumptions, the framework we've used to define the past. It suggests that civilization is not a straight line, but a cycle, that knowledge has been gained and lost more than once. That perhaps we are not the first to reach this level of understanding. And if so, then what lies beneath the pyramid may not just rewrite history. It may reconnect us to a legacy long buried under the weight of sand and time. We must ask, are these areas sealed because they are empty, or because they are not? Is access denied to protect delicate archaeology or to protect the narrative that supports entire institutions? Curiosity is not a threat. It is a birthright, and when the evidence speaks, it is our responsibility to listen. Beneath the plateau, the stones do not lie. They wait, in silence, in darkness, in secrecy. The doors are still sealed, the chambers still unopened, and the truth, whatever it is, remains buried. But not forever. History is often defined not just by what survives, but by what is lost. Fires destroy libraries. Floods erase cities. Conquest reduces centuries of knowledge to ash. But sometimes what vanishes is not a casualty of chance. It is taken, hidden, or destroyed with intent. And in the case of a mysterious manuscript discovered in Egypt during the 19th century, we are left not with the document itself, but with echoes of what it might have revealed, echoes that, if true, confirm everything the stones of Giza suggest, that the pyramids were not built by the Egyptians, but inherited from an earlier, forgotten world. The story begins in Cairo, in the dusty backrooms of monasteries and the private libraries of scholars. In the 1800s, European collectors were scouring Egypt for ancient texts, artifacts, and manuscripts. The Coptic Christian communities, descendants of Egypt's ancient population, had preserved scrolls and codices stretching back centuries, some copied from even older sources. Among them, according to scattered reports and fragments, was a particular manuscript. It was written in Coptic, but translated, the story goes, from a much older tongue. It contained a claim so extraordinary that even the few who saw it were unsure how to interpret it. According to those who glimpsed its contents, the manuscript stated that the pyramids were built before the Nile knew its place, before the river flowed where it does now. It also claimed they were constructed before words, implying a time before written language. In one sweep, this account pushed the origin of the pyramids back, not centuries, but millennia into the realm of deep prehistory, before dynastic Egypt, before agriculture, before civilization as we define it. But before this document could be studied in full, it vanished. Some say it was lost in a fire that consumed the private collection of the man who held it. Others claim it was sold to a private collector who never allowed it to be seen again. A few even whisper that it was deliberately destroyed, its implications too dangerous, too destabilizing to the established timeline. What we are left with are second-hand accounts, notes in letters, fragments in journals, and mentions in obscure scholarly writings. The manuscript itself is gone, but the shockwaves remain. Why would such a manuscript be destroyed? If it were a forgery, surely it could be preserved, analysed, dismissed. Scholars have studied hoaxes before texts falsely attributed to Plato, scrolls claiming to be from Atlantis. But this one was different. It did not glorify Egypt. It did not expand the glory of its pharaohs. It did not ascribe divine origin to the pyramids. Instead, it diminished them. It suggested the monuments were older than Egypt itself, the work of a people who lived before the Nile took its current course. That detail alone, the Nile's path, is a clue that cannot be ignored. Geological research confirms that the Nile has shifted dramatically over the last 12,000 years. During the African humid period, its course was more westerly, meandering through a verdant Sahara filled with lakes and grasslands. It was only later, after climate changes turned the land arid, that the river settled into the path we now recognize. A manuscript stating that the pyramids were built before this shift aligns disturbingly well with modern scientific data. More than one ancient source speaks of a time before the flood, when gods or wise ancestors built great structures to preserve knowledge against catastrophe. These tales, found in cultures from Mesopotamia to Central America, to describe a moment when something precious was hidden in stone, waiting to be rediscovered. The lost Coptic manuscript may have been one more fragment of that forgotten memory, an echo preserved in religious libraries and passed down through centuries of quiet guardianship. It is important to understand the role of Coptic communities in preserving Egypt's heritage. After the decline of pharaonic Egypt, and later during the Islamic conquests, Coptic Christians maintained libraries filled with both Christian and pre-Christian material. Their monasteries became time capsules, bridging the ancient and medieval worlds. They copied texts, preserved oral histories, and sometimes translated older scrolls into their own script. It is entirely plausible that remnants of ancient Egyptian knowledge, written in demotic or even earlier forms, were preserved and translated into Coptic long after their original languages had faded from memory. If such a document existed, it could have been unique, a last survivor of a lineage of thought tracing back to Egypt's prehistory. The fact that it vanished is either a tragic loss or a chilling convenience. Either way, we are left with a void. But like the sealed doors inside the pyramid, that void is surrounded by clues. The Great Pyramid has no inscriptions. The Sphinx bears no builder's name. The Egyptian texts that do mention them describe restoration, not creation. Geological evidence places the Sphinx in a time of heavy rainfall, 9,000 years before Khafre's reign. The pyramid encodes knowledge of Earth's dimensions that should have been impossible to measure. The Osiris shaft lies in silence. Sealed doors remain unexplored, and the manuscript that may have explained it all reduced to ash or hidden away. In this, we see a pattern. The most compelling pieces of evidence are not those displayed in museums. They are the ones locked behind bureaucracy, sealed beneath stone, or erased from the written record. The official narrative persists not because it is perfect, but because it is safe. We live in an age where science can uncover hidden chambers and decode ancient languages. But what happens when what we find contradicts the story we've been taught to believe? Do we rewrite history, or do we hide the page? The manuscript is gone. We cannot summon it back. But the words that survive before the river knew its place, before words linger like a riddle, and when combined with the physical evidence, they suggest that the pyramids were never just Egyptian. They were something more, something older, something that stood before memory and was meant to last long after. Giza is not alone. The mystery it represents does not stand in isolation, a solitary enigma in the Egyptian desert. As the sands of time are brushed away around the globe, we find that similar anomalies emerge, monuments that should not exist when they do. Structures so advanced they defy the technology of the era attributed to them. Alignments so precise they rival modern engineering. And the pattern that begins at the foot of the Great Pyramid stretches across continents and oceans, connecting distant civilizations that, according to history, had no contact, no shared language, and no reason to build in the same way. In the hills of southeastern Turkey, a site lay buried beneath millennia of Earth until the 1990 seconds, when excavations revealed something unthinkable. Göbekli Tepe, now known as the oldest known megalithic structure on Earth, predates Stonehenge by over 7,000 years. Radiocarbon dating places it at 12,000 years old, built in an age when humanity was supposed to be limited to small, nomadic bands of hunter-gatherers, without cities, temples, or centralized organization. Yet what was uncovered were stone circles made of pillars weighing up to 20 tons, carefully arranged, engraved with animals and symbols, and deliberately buried by their creators. This site changed everything. Göbekli Tepe rewrote the origins of human society, proving that the capability to organize large-scale construction, ceremonial architecture, and symbolic art existed well before agriculture. But it also raised new questions. How did a supposedly primitive society quarry, move, and erect stones of such scale? Why did they bury them after completion? And why did the symbols on its pillars resonate with imagery found in later civilizations? Thousands of miles away, travel west to the mountains of Lebanon, and you encounter Baalbek. Towering Roman columns still stand, but beneath them lies a foundation that tells a different story. The trilithon, 3 massive stones, each weighing over 800 tons, form a platform upon which later structures were built. These blocks are so large that no known Roman technology could have moved them into place. Yet there they are, fitted together with millimeter precision, elevated nearly 20 feet above ground. Nearby lies an even larger stone over 1,000 tons, still attached to the bedrock, as if abandoned mid-extraction. No inscriptions name their builders. The Romans never claimed to have placed them. In fact, they built on top of these megaliths, adapting the foundation to their own purposes, just as the Egyptians may have done at Giza, and just like at Giza, the true origins remain hidden in silence. These stones are not aligned with Roman architecture, but with older, celestial patterns, suggesting that whoever first laid them did so with a knowledge of the stars, cross the Atlantic and ascend the high Andes. And you will find another puzzle, Pumapunku, part of the ancient Tiwanaku complex in modern-day Bolivia. The stones here are not the largest, but they are among the most precisely cut. Carved from diorite and andesite materials harder than steel, the blocks at Pumapunku have edges so sharp and angles so perfect they resemble parts manufactured by machines. Right-angled grooves, perfectly straight cuts, and symmetrical notches suggest the use of tools and techniques unknown to the cultures credited with their construction. Modern stonemasons have attempted to replicate these features using Bronze Age tools. They fail, time and again. The precision cannot be matched. The stone responds to diamond-tipped saws, not hammers and chisels, and the interlocking joints, some that fit with such tight tolerances that even a razor blade cannot slip between, defy the idea that these were shaped by trial and error. Like the Great Pyramid, these stones are not decorated, they are functional, and, like Giza, the site is oriented astronomically. Journey into the heart of the Mediterranean, and beneath the surface of Malta you will find the hypogeum of Fal Saflieni, an underground complex over 5,000 years old, carved directly into limestone. Its chambers are elaborate, multi-leveled, and acoustically tuned. The most famous room, the Oracle Chamber, resonates at the same 110 Hz frequency as the King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid. When sound is introduced, the room vibrates, amplifying the voice and triggering a physical sensation in those within. This is not coincidence. This is acoustic engineering designed by ancient hands that understood resonance, frequency, and sound. The more sites you study, the more the pattern becomes undeniable. The stones are enormous. The alignments are astronomical. The precision is mathematical, and the context, according to traditional history, is impossible. These structures do not belong to the technological level of the cultures that allegedly built them. Instead, they seem inherited or preserved. What links them is not geography or language. It is silence. The same lack of contemporary documentation that surrounds the Great Pyramid surrounds these monuments too. No blueprints, no stories of construction, no myths of invention, only the buildings themselves, impossible in their time, inexplicable in their function, and eternal in their presence. If it were only one site, we could dismiss it as an anomaly. If it were only two, we might suspect coincidence. But when the same features appear across the globe, massive stones, precise cuts, star alignments, resonant frequencies, we must consider another possibility, that a forgotten civilization once reached a level of understanding and technical capability far beyond what we've assumed, that it left behind markers across deserts and mountaintops, in temples and tunnels to survive what they knew was coming: a flood, a collapse, a fall from greatness into memory. Perhaps they built not for themselves, but for those who would come after. For us, to awaken, to remember, to follow the stones back through time and see not the ruins of isolated cultures, but the remnants of a unified memory fractured by cataclysm, scattered by time, but never entirely lost. The pattern repeats, the silence persists, but the monuments remain. The architects of these ancient wonders have no names. Their languages are lost, their cities erased, their bones crumbled to dust, yet their works endure etched in granite, lifted into alignment with the heavens, cut with such technical perfection that even our most advanced machinery struggles to replicate it. Whoever they were, these engineers of deep time left behind more than monuments. They left messages encoded in frequency, orientation, and stone. And although we have forgotten their words, the precision of their craft still speaks. Pumapunku, Göbekli Tepe, Baalbek, and Giza, these sites do not fit comfortably into the conventional map of human development. The people traditionally credited with their construction lacked the tools, the infrastructure, and often the agricultural base to support such undertakings. And yet, here, stand blocks weighing hundreds of tons, stones cut to laser-like precision, and alignments that follow celestial patterns known only to civilizations with sophisticated astronomical awareness. These are not the scattered efforts of emerging builders. They are the unified expressions of master planners. Consider again the trilithon of Baalbek. Each of the three stones, weighing upwards of 800 tons, was transported and raised 20 feet into the air. No modern crane today could replicate that feat on location without massive preparation. And yet these stones are fitted so tightly that you cannot slide a paper between them. Beneath these blocks lie smaller, earlier stones, possibly remnants of an even older phase of construction. Above them, the Romans built their own temples, but they never claimed the foundation. In fact, they seemed puzzled by it, using it as a base for their structures without knowing how or why it was built. Now turn to the layout of megalithic sites around the world. Many of them are not just randomly placed. They are oriented with astonishing accuracy to solstices, equinoxes, and star risings. In Malta, the Hypogeum's oracle chamber resonates at a frequency that matches the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid. This shared resonance suggests that two seemingly unconnected cultures, separated by thousands of miles, were working from the same blueprint, one grounded in the relationship between vibration and matter. The builders knew something we have forgotten. They understood resonance not metaphorically, but scientifically, sound as force, vibration as structure. They built not just to last, but to resonate, to interact with the earth itself. Quartz-rich stones placed in high-pressure positions, like those in the Great Pyramid's core, could create piezoelectric effects, generating energy from compression and vibration. These are not accidental materials. They were chosen with purpose, aligned with intention, activated by forces we are only beginning to investigate. Beyond the acoustic and astronomical elements, the geometric precision of these structures is equally compelling. At Giza, the Great Pyramid's base is a perfect square, aligned to the cardinal points with a precision of less than 1/10 of a degree. The ratio of its height to its base encodes pi, and its geometry corresponds with the golden ratio, the Earth's radius, and its circumference. These are not decorations, they are data. They are the fingerprints of a civilization that mapped the planet and understood the sky not as myth, but as mechanism. And then there is Göbekli Tepe, built over 12,000 years ago. Its enclosures form perfect circles. Its pillars are carved with animal reliefs and abstract symbols that some scholars believe represent constellations. This suggests a knowledge of the night sky stretching back into the last ice age, long before official history recognizes such awareness. Even more remarkable is that the site was intentionally buried by its builders, not destroyed, not abandoned, buried layer upon layer, carefully preserved beneath soil, as though they wanted it to be discovered later. This is a recurring theme. Pumapunku's blocks lie scattered, as if the site was dismantled suddenly, or disrupted mid-construction. The trilithon was reused, its origin obscured. The chambers beneath Giza were sealed. The pyramid's internal shafts were closed with copper-pinned doors, placed where no human could reach. These are not acts of abandonment. They are acts of preservation. What were they hiding? Or perhaps more accurately, what were they protecting? If these structures are part of a global pattern, then they may represent a coordinated effort to preserve something critical. Not wealth, not bodies, but knowledge, a system of understanding that encompassed geometry, astronomy, acoustics, and energy. A system that could not be passed down through paper or language, but only through form, through stone, through alignment. Modern science is beginning to rediscover what may once have been known. Studies in cymatics reveal how sound shapes matter. Frequencies generate geometric patterns in sand, water, even biological tissue. In the ancient world, sound was not entertainment, it was power. The Om of India, the chants of Tibetan monks, the Egyptian sistrum, all point to an ancient memory of vibration as sacred force. The ancients may have understood how to harness this structurally, spiritually, and scientifically. Our ancestors were not primitives staring at the stars in fear. They were observers, mathematicians, engineers, and builders. Not all, perhaps, but some, and those few left behind clues for a time when the world would rise again, when someone would stand beneath the monuments and finally ask the right questions. What we see today as separate mysteries may be fragments of a singular legacy, a civilization, or a network of cultures that spanned continents and encoded its wisdom in indestructible forms, that understood that the earth itself was a kind of instrument, and that monuments, if tuned correctly, could interact with the sky, the ground, and the human spirit. We are only now learning to listen. For centuries, scholars challenged the idea of a lost advanced civilization by pointing to the absence of remains. Where are the cities? They asked. Where are the tools, the bones, the trash heaps that civilizations inevitably leave behind? If a culture capable of building the Great Pyramid or Göbekli Tepe existed, why are there no signs of their people? Why do they seem to vanish into history, leaving behind only stone? But in recent decades, a new science has emerged, one that does not rely on pottery shards or crumbling cities to speak for the past, one that can reach beyond the grave, past the decay of time and flesh. That science is archaeogenetics, the study of ancient DNA, and what it has revealed is astonishing. Hidden within the genomes of modern and ancient populations are traces of ancestors who left no other record of themselves. No tools, no cities, no graves, only a genetic shadow. They are called ghost populations, and they are rewriting our understanding of prehistory. The term ghost population refers to a group of people that once lived, reproduced, migrated, and shaped the genetic landscape, but whose physical remains have never been found. These populations are detected through the genetic noise they leave behind, the unexplained components in DNA samples that cannot be matched to any known group. Like echoes in a canyon, their presence is inferred by the shape of the void they left. One of the most enigmatic of these is the basal Eurasians. Geneticists discovered them when studying the DNA of early Near Eastern farmers. These ancient farmers carried a genetic component that didn't match anything else. It didn't come from European hunter-gatherers. It didn't come from known African lineages. It came from something older, something that had split from the human family tree before any known Eurasian group. And, critically, basal Eurasians seem to have had no Neanderthal ancestry, unlike nearly all other non-African humans. This ghost population is estimated to have diverged from other humans over 50,000 years ago, but their bones have never been found. We know them only through the DNA of those who came after those who mixed with them and carried a piece of them forward. These people contributed significantly to the ancestry of Neolithic communities that eventually built the earliest cities, cultivated crops, and domesticated animals. And, possibly, to those who built Göbekli Tepe. In North Africa, a similar mystery unfolds. Studies of ancient DNA from the region reveal a complex mixture of ancestries, some that link to sub-Saharan Africa, others to the Near East, and still others to groups that no longer exist. These lost lineages once thrived during the African humid period, when the Sahara was green and fertile, but when the climate changed, they disappeared, absorbed into other populations or wiped out by desertification. These Saharan ghost populations lived precisely during the time when the Sphinx shows signs of water erosion, between 9,000 and 5,000 years before the Common Era. North Africa was dotted with lakes, rivers, and thriving communities. Stone circles at Nabta Playa, megalithic sites aligned to the solstices, and scattered settlements all suggest a culture capable of observing the heavens and organizing large-scale construction. But like so many others, their material culture was swallowed by the sand. Today, modern North Africans carry traces of these ancestors in their DNA. So do some Middle Eastern and Southern European populations. The genes have endured even when the names, languages, and histories have not, and in those genes lies a silent testimony that people once lived in these now barren regions. and that they were far more complex than previously believed. Elsewhere, ghost populations have been detected in Southeast Asia, the Americas, and even Europe. In each case, the genetic traces hint at migrations, interactions, and disappearances that left no archaeological footprint. Populations that came and went before we developed writing, before we carved our histories into stone. They are not figments of speculation. They are measurable, testable, and statistically undeniable. These findings upend the traditional view of human history as a slow, linear progression. They suggest that complexity, knowledge, and even greatness can arise and vanish multiple times. That the absence of ruins does not mean the absence of civilization. That memory can persist, not just in myth, but in our very blood. This brings us back to the monuments. If a lost people once flourished during the African humid period, and if they were the ones who carved the Sphinx and perhaps laid the foundations for Giza's structures, then they would fit perfectly into this emerging genetic landscape. Their physical culture may have been lost to shifting sands, their stories erased by time, but their legacy may live in the stones and in us. The DNA does not tell us what these people believed, what they built, or what they feared, but the monuments might. The mathematical precision of the Great Pyramid, the astronomical alignments of Nabta Playa, the water-worn body of the Sphinx, these are the remnants not of a myth, but of a reality that once was. Perhaps this is what the original builders intended. Perhaps they knew that bones would vanish, that cities would crumble, that records would burn. So they built differently. They carved into bedrock. They aligned to the stars. They encoded their knowledge not in fragile things, but in structures meant to endure even when their names were forgotten. The ghost populations are not ghosts in the mystical sense. They are the forgotten chapters of our shared story, the missing links between the monuments that remain and the people we can no longer name. And now, with science pulling them back from oblivion, we may finally be able to trace their footsteps, not just through DNA, but through the messages they left in stone. The Great Pyramid rises from the desert like a frozen equation, a monolith of meaning carved in limestone and granite. For generations, it was thought to be a tomb, a house for the dead, a grand final resting place for a single king. But if you strip away that assumption, what remains is not an empty structure. What remains is a message, a memory encoded not in words, but in geometry, a form of communication that does not age, does not require translation, and does not decay with the passage of time. The pyramid is not a monument to death. It is a monument to knowledge. Inside its structure lie proportions so precise they mirror Earth itself. The height of the pyramid, when multiplied by 43,200, equals the planet's polar radius. Its base perimeter, multiplied by the same number, gives the equatorial circumference. The ratio of its height to its base encodes pi. Its slope encodes the golden ratio, phi. These constants are not Egyptian. They are universal. They are mathematical truths found in the structure of DNA, in the spirals of galaxies, in the patterns of seashells, and in the architecture of reality itself. These are not symbols of a king's ego. They are expressions of something deeper, something eternal. Walk through the pyramid and you do not find tomb paintings or prayers to the gods. You find silence, not the silence of neglect, but the silence of intent. The king's chamber is built of red granite, a material resonant with piezoelectric properties. The room hums at 110 Hz, a frequency known to alter human consciousness, to shift brainwaves into theta states associated with deep meditation and intuition. It is not coincidence. The room was designed to do this. It is not decorated because it is not ceremonial. It is functional. This structure, with its precise alignments and encoded measurements, behaves more like an instrument than a mausoleum. It is aligned to true north within a fraction of a degree. Its shafts point to Orion's belt, Sirius, and Thuban, the stars associated with resurrection, rebirth, and celestial order in Egyptian mythology, but also with precise astronomical coordinates across millennia. Whoever built the pyramid understood the precession of the equinoxes, the slow wobble of Earth's axis, and the way the sky changes over cycles lasting 26,000 years. That knowledge did not come from watching the stars for a single lifetime. It came from records, from continuity, or from inheritance. This is why the idea of the pyramid as memory becomes so powerful. In a world prone to disaster, in a species prone to forgetting, how do you preserve essential knowledge, not on scrolls, which can burn, not in language, which can evolve and die, but in form, in proportion, in stone? You build a monument that is also a message, a structure whose very dimensions carry meaning, a map of the earth and sky, a code that does not require translation, only observation and understanding. Throughout history, civilizations have collapsed, floods have drowned coastlines, fires have devoured cities, empires have risen and vanished. But the Great Pyramid has endured, not because it was hidden, but because it was built to survive. Its builders may have known their world was ending. They may have watched the skies darken, or the climate shift, or the oceans rise. And instead of trying to save themselves, they tried to save what they knew. They tried to send a message to the future. To us, the concept of memory encoded in architecture is not new. Medieval cathedrals encoded theological systems in stained glass and layout. Gothic arches mirror harmonic ratios. Renaissance artists buried geometry in painting. But the pyramid is different. It is not artistic. It is not decorative. It is pure structure, pure ratio, pure form. And that makes it harder to destroy. Even today, most people who visit the pyramid see only the surface. They walk around it, stand in awe of its size, and take photographs. Few realize that they are standing inside a book, not one written in letters, but in the language of physics and astronomy. Fewer still understand what is at stake, because if this structure is a memory device, then what it remembers could be vital. A warning, perhaps, a record of a lost science, a message from a civilization that vanished not through ignorance, but through catastrophe. The ancient texts of many cultures speak of a golden age, a time before the flood, when gods or giants or wise ancestors built great cities and taught humanity the arts of agriculture, astronomy, and architecture. These stories are often dismissed as myth, but what if they are fractured memories of something real? What if the flood was not a metaphor, but an event? What if the Golden Age was not fantasy, but history? And what if the Great Pyramid is the only remaining witness? Its silence is not emptiness. It is containment. It holds not a body, but a question. Who were the builders? What did they know? Why did they build this? The answers are not written on papyrus or carved in hieroglyphs. They are embedded in the angles, the alignments, the measurements. It is a riddle set in stone. This is why modern institutions hesitate to question the tomb theory, because once you discard it, you are left with something far more unsettling. Not a missing pharaoh, but a missing chapter of humanity. Not a failure of imagination, but a failure of memory, and that memory may be more important now than ever. We live in an age of fragile storage. Digital data decays. Servers fail. Hard drives crash. What will survive us if we fall? What will remain if the lights go out and the networks vanish? Perhaps the builders of the pyramid asked the same question, and they answered it with geometry, with resonance, with stone. The pyramid does not beg for attention. It does not call out. It waits. It waits for someone who knows how to read its language. And when that person comes, it will speak not in words, but in constants, not in sentences, but in alignments. And what it says may change everything. The final stars rise over the Giza plateau. The desert is quiet. The wind still. The Great Pyramid looms, black against the silver sky. Its corners sharp, its mass unyielding, its mystery unchanged. And as we stand before it, a realization settles. Like the dust beneath our feet, we are not the first to be here. To wonder, to ask, to search. The builders of this monument were not dreaming of eternity for themselves. They were dreaming of us, of someone who would come much later, when the world had forgotten, when the flood waters had receded, and the stars had shifted once again into their ancient alignments. They carved not a tomb, but a message, and that message is simple. Remember, we have followed the trail through stone and silence, through geology and myth, through DNA and disappearance. We have seen the signs left behind, the erosion on the Sphinx that speaks of ancient reigns, the granite box in the king's chamber too large to have ever been placed there after construction, the shafts leading to sealed doors no human could have used, the inscriptions that describe restoration, not construction. We have read the encoded language of geometry, of pi and phi, of Earth's radius and precession cycles carved into blocks of stone. We have found the same patterns echoed across the world from Göbekli Tepe to Baalbek, from Pumapunku to Malta, megalithic fingerprints of an intelligence that operated beyond the limits of known history. And we have listened to the voices of science, of archaeogenetics, revealing ghost populations that once walked the earth, whose bones have crumbled but whose blood still flows in our veins, populations erased by time, by climate, by cataclysm, leaving only stones and strands of DNA as proof that they existed, that they were here, and that they were capable of greatness. All of this converges into one stunning truth. We were not the beginning. Civilization is not a straight line. It is a cycle. And the monuments left behind are not celebrations of power, but anchors of memory, desperate attempts to pass forward what mattered most when everything else was about to be lost. They are not declarations of dominion, but of humility, of understanding that even the greatest achievements can fall to ruin, that knowledge must be stored in the most enduring form available, not parchment, not language, but stone. The pyramid, then, is not for the dead, it is for the survivors. It was built to last beyond collapse, beyond forgetfulness, beyond the end of stories. Its precision ensures its survival. Its alignments ensure its meaning can be rediscovered by anyone, in any age, who understands the heavens and the earth. It is a book written in physics, a time capsule sealed not by technology, but by architecture. Consider the timing. The end of the last ice age saw dramatic sea level rise, rapid climate change, and continent-wide extinction events. It is no coincidence that many ancient myths speak of a flood, of a deluge, of a fall from a golden age into a time of hardship and rebuilding. These are not just stories. They are memories carried forward by those who endured, and what they could not preserve in words, they preserved in monuments. The builders may have known they could not prevent the collapse, but they could ensure that when the survivors rose again, when memory began to return, there would be something waiting unbroken, unmoved, unquestionable. A structure that could point to the stars and say, "This is where we were." A monument that could whisper, "We existed. We understood. We cared enough to leave this behind." And now, after thousands of years, perhaps we are finally ready to listen, to stop dismissing what we cannot explain, to stop sanding down the inconvenient edges of history until it fits a narrative we find comfortable. The evidence is here. The logic is sound. The question is no longer whether the pyramids are older than Egypt. The question is, what will we do with this knowledge? Will we bury it again? Will we guard the sealed doors and suppress the excavations, or will we look deeper, question harder, and search further, not just to rewrite history, but to reclaim it? Because this is not just about the past. It's about the future. If the previous cycle ended in disaster, and if the builders foresaw it, and if they encoded what they knew in monuments of stone to help the next civilization rise stronger, wiser, more aware, then we owe it to them to understand, to read what they wrote, to remember what they preserved, because what happened once can happen again. And the silence of the pyramid is not a warning, it is a lifeline. We are standing on the same precipice they once faced. Climate is shifting. Systems are strained. Knowledge is vast but fragile. And so the pyramid becomes a mirror. What will we leave behind? What will endure of us if the lights go out? What will the next people find? Buried in sand. Waiting to be rediscovered? Will they find more tombs? Or will they find more messages? In the final light of night, the Sphinx watches the horizon. It has seen ages rise and fall. It has watched the Nile shift and the sky rotate. It does not move. It remembers, and in its shadow, the pyramid breathes, not with the breath of the dead, but with the hum of intent, the pulse of design, the stillness of waiting. It was not built for us, but it was built for someone like us. And now we are here.